Hey y'all, welcome back. This is Feasting on the Word. I am DG Hamblin, and today we are talking about the original Stripling warrior. We're going to talk about the other 2000 as well, but there's a connection here. So it ties something that jumped out at me a few years ago with something that jumped off the page at me this morning. I was reading in chapter 53 because our Come Follow Me this week is Alma 53 through 63. This is not a Come Follow Me lesson. Lots of other people doing those. I tried it. It really wasn't my thing. Anyway, so I'm reading in chapter 53 about the Stripling warriors, and this thing jumps kind of off the page at me, and I'm like, wow, that sounds really familiar. And so I went back to check, and sure enough, it was familiar. So let's do a little background first before we really get into the connection I made. What do we have going on here in chapter 53 of Alma? Well, the Nephites and Lamanites are at war, and it's pretty fierce. And that not only are they at war, but there's a group of people who live in the land of Zarahemla. And these are converted Lamanites. They were at one time enemies of the Nephites. And when they were converted to the gospel, they felt terrible for their previous lifestyle, which had been one of robbing and murdering and of war. And they had killed many Nephites. So they made an oath and a promise that they would never fight again. They would never take up weapons of war again, and they buried all their weapons. They made this oath and this covenant, and when they did so, the Nephites brought them down into their land, the land of Zarahemla, and they gave them a place to stay, and they promised that they would protect them. And so they have. Now, as this war continues on, these people of Ammon, who are the converted Lamanites, they're called the people of Ammon, they feel bad because they see the struggle that the Nephites are having and the difficulty, and they feel a desire to take up arms and to defend themselves and to help the Nephites in this war. And so they are then convinced that they shouldn't do that. They should not break the covenant which they made. So they didn't go to war, but they had sons, young men, strong and willing to fight. And they end up going to war. Now let's read about them a little bit in verses 16 through 18 here in Alma 53. It says, "But behold, it came to pass, they had many sons, who had not entered into a covenant that they would not take their weapons of war to defend themselves against their enemies. Therefore they did assemble themselves together at this time, as many as were able to take up arms, and they called themselves Nephites." So these young sons of the people of Ammon, who had been Lamanites and converted, they call themselves Nephites. "And they entered into a covenant to fight for the liberty of the Nephites, yea, to protect the land unto the laying down of their lives. Yea, even they covenanted that they never would give up their liberty, but they would fight in all cases to protect the Nephites and themselves from bondage. Now behold, there were 2,000 of these young men who entered into this covenant and took their weapons of war to defend their country." It goes on to say that they wanted Helaman to be their leader, and he was. And then we read, starting in verse 20, a description of these young men. So I'm going to read that, and then we're going to go and read a description of the original Stripling warrior. And then I'll tell you why he's the original Stripling. Okay, it says in verse 20, "And they were all young men, and they were exceedingly valiant for courage. and also for strength and activity. And but behold, this was not all. They were men who were true at all times in whatsoever thing they were entrusted. Yea, they were men of truth and soberness, for they had been taught to keep the commandments of God and to walk uprightly before him. They were pretty outstanding young men. And Hamblin marches at the head of these 2,000 stripling warriors. Now, let's see if this description doesn't correlate with what we read about these young men in Alma. He is described as a mighty, valiant man, a man of war. Now, he had not been to war at this point, but he was well trained. Well trained in the same sense as Abraham, who took his trained servants, he armed them, and he went and they fought against the armies of Kedorlaomer and defeated them. So these he is trained to fight. Why? Well, here's a clue. He's a shepherd. And shepherds had to be able to defend their flocks. So they had to know how to fight. Lots of things would like to come and steal a sheep or a lamb or a cow, and you have to be able to defend that flock. Okay, so he's a mighty, valiant man and a man of war, big and strong, lots of ability, and prudent in matters. So we have covered the valiant for courage and for strength and activity, and then when it says that he was prudent in matters, well, that to me sounds a lot like the stripling warriors here, who were true at all times and whatsoever thing they were entrusted, that they were men of truth and soberness. Kind of related terms. Okay. And it also says that the Lord is with him. The original stripling warrior has the Lord with him, just as these 2,000 young men walked uprightly before God. So there is, in my mind, a definite similarity in the description. Okay, now these young men had never been to war, but they were trained up and they went. This original stripling warrior had also never been to war. These 2,000 had to go and fight against armies of men who were much older and more experienced. The same with our original stripling warrior. He went to fight against somebody who was much older and more experienced in war and in battle. And I call him the original stripling warrior because after his fight and after he has won, the king wants to know about his family, specifically who his father is, because the king is going to set this original stripling warrior's family free, make them free. They want to pay taxes and all that other kind of stuff. So the king turns to his general who's next to him, and he says, "Inquire thou whose son the stripling is." So a few years ago, as I'm reading this story, you might know who I'm talking about. As I'm reading this story, and I had read it, I don't know, 50 times or more, maybe 100, all of a sudden that just jumps out of the page at me. I'm going, stripling. What an interesting term to use. I wonder how many times we find stripling in the Old Testament. So I did a quick search, and lo and behold, we only find it the one time. It's here in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 56. And it is in reference to David, who had just slain Goliath. David was, in my mind, the original stripling warrior. A young man, too young to be part of the army. A young man who was a mighty, valiant man. A man of war. Again, he hadn't been to war, but he was trained. He was a trained fighter as a shepherd. Prudent in matters. He was trustworthy with anything. It also says he was good looking. And the Lord was with him. And then we have the other similarities that I mentioned about them going to battle. You know, he had to go fight Goliath. Now, I'm going to tell you my opinion. That was not a fair fight for Goliath. I think I did a video on that. Maybe I'll put a link for that in the description as well, or you can go find it. These young stripling warriors going to battle may have been young and inexperienced, but they fought mightily. And how many of them were ever killed? They were all wounded. None of them were ever killed. And we, of course, know that David was never killed in battle either. Just another similarity. So that's what I've got for now. It's just a small thing, but I thought it was pretty cool. As I read that description, I knew that David had been referred to as a stripling. Oh, wait. One more thing. The word stripling. When you look up the word stripling, and you can look it up in Strong's Concordance or Brown Driver Briggs or a bunch of other references that will give you the original Hebrew. The word in Hebrew that's translated stripling is elam. And when it's transliterated into English, spelled E-L-E-M or E-L-A-M. So if I didn't know what the pronunciation was supposed to be, I would probably pronounce it Elam. Maybe the root of the name Helaman. So if you take Elam, now I might be wrong. I might be stretching this a bit. I don't know. We do know that not only in the Bible, but the Book of Mormon is full of puns and wordplay and that kind of thing. So I don't think it's a lot of a stretch. Anyway, you take Elam and you put an H in front of it for the stripling, Ha'elam or Ha'elam. And if you took that, now I'm going to admit my knowledge of Hebrew is about this big. I have to use references and things. I can only read a few Hebrew words. I'm not a Hebrew scholar by any stretch. And so there's probably a lot of people going, yeah, he's way off. He's way wrong. But whatever. I don't care. So I then wondered about the last part of Helaman. So if you take an N and you add it to the end of a word, if I'm remembering correctly, it can make it a feminine plural possessive, I think. So it could possibly be the striplings of theirs, as in maybe their mothers. I think it's pretty cool. It could be. Why not? I might be way off. Okay, look, that's all I've got for now. Thanks for listening to me ramble for a few minutes. You know, I'm just a regular guy who loves the scriptures. And I love finding stuff. And I love finding these connections. It just gets me excited. It makes me want to study even more. So, go study your scriptures. Learn something. Have a great day. I love y'all. And I hope to see you in Eagle Mountain, October 24th through the 26th.